All right, guys, welcome back to Evan's World. This is The Recovery, episode 2, where I'm going to discuss how to find the right doctor. I've had an acute injury. I spent a considerable amount of time seeking out a doctor that I felt was qualified to do the repair. There's no shortage of doctors, orthopedic surgeons available, people who call themselves sports medicine doctors, et cetera, et cetera. That said, I was very cautious to move forward with just anybody. Not only because I do this for a living, but also because, I think most of you out there watching would agree that should you incur any type of acute injury, you want the best treatment possible. You want to move forward with a doctor that is going to perform the surgery about as good as it can possibly be done, because a good surgery has everything to do with a good recovery. I know that post-surgery I'm going to do my part, everything I can nutritionally, when it comes to rehabilitation. I'm going to cover all the bases. So I want to start off first with a good surgery. The first thing to consider before you even attempt to find the right doctor is your insurance. And I've learned more about insurance over the last week than I would have cared to. Between PPOs and HMOs, et cetera, you're going to need to first find out what type of benefits you have. If you have this surgery, is it covered? Most orthopedic surgeries are. For most insurances, I believe. Under mine, it was. I do have a fairly large deductible. I use an insurance plan that is not super expensive on a monthly basis, and that leads to a higher deductible amount. But I always figure, I don't go to the doctor that often. I would likely, when possible, decline just, regular care. I don't usually need it, but if I'm going to use my insurance, it's going to be for something large, which in this case it turned out to be. I don't know the actual cost of this surgery, but if I had to guess, I would say it's probably around $30,000. So you want to know what your insurance covers, what the maximum out-of-pocket expense is going to be for you, because you don't want to end up injuring yourself financially. Granted, you want to find the best doctor, but also you want to find someone who participates with your insurance plan, someone who accepts your insurance. If possible, what you'd want to do is, prior to any surgery, contact your insurance company, get a pre-authorization for the surgery. If they're not able or willing to give you one, then at least speak to someone who you can get to say, yes, this person is in network, the surgery would be covered, et cetera, and get a case number from them, a reference number, because all the phone calls are documented, they're recorded, and you want to establish some type of documentation. Listen, because the last thing you want is to go through all this, be post-surgery, and then have your insurance company say, no, we're not going to pay the claim. When you've done your due diligence, you've spoken to people, you've done everything you can to ensure that it would be covered. So document as much as you can. Once you find doctors who are in network, there's quite a few considerations when it comes to a doctor, right? First and foremost, I think that experience is very, very important. One of the things you want to ask the doctor is, how many of these surgeries do you do in a typical year? If you talk to one doctor and he says 5, you talk to another doctor and he says, well, I did 5 this month, that's something to consider. It's possible too that, people can do something all day long. They can do a ton of it. It doesn't necessarily mean they do it well, but it is something to consider. You want to be with someone who is very familiar with this injury. They do it often, because I do believe that is the first step of, making a decision as to whether or not you go with a certain doctor. I spoke with several surgeons. I got everything from I do a half a dozen a year to I do a half a dozen a month. You want someone who does this often, in my opinion. It doesn't matter what they learned in medical school or, what they read in a textbook. There's a big difference between theory and application. You want someone who applies a lot. Next, you want a doctor who works on people like you, right? I wouldn't go to a doctor who mainly works in pediatrics, right? Works on kids all day long. I want to go see somebody who says, yeah, I see guys like you all the time. I don't want to be a surprise to somebody. I don't want to walk into a doctor's office and him go, whoa, you're really big. I've never worked on somebody like you before. Yeah, maybe in principle, the surgery is the same for everybody. I understand our bodies all work the same. But, there may be certain things that a doctor learns along the way for a guy who's bigger. If you're 250 pounds and you're a professional athlete, you might not feel comfortable with someone who deals with a lot of elderly patients, right? So I want to see somebody who works with professional athletes, isn't surprised by my size or development or the injury itself. You want to walk into somebody and then go, "Are you kidding me? I do this surgery all the time and I see guys like you all the time." It's not a thing. Another thing to consider, and this is very important. This is something you might not consider. And in talking to different doctors, I asked them this question: how long will the surgery take? The first time I asked the question, it was purely out of curiosity. And the doctor told me, he said, about 90 minutes. I said, okay, that doesn't seem like a long time. And when I started talking to other doctors, I got similar answers. One doctor said, take me about 20, 30 minutes. And this was the doctor who seemed the most qualified. When I looked at his credentials, I looked at what hospitals he was affiliated with, he was the one who I had the best feeling about. And when he told me 20 minutes, I said, I had to ask him, I said, well, I've talked to other doctors. Now, I'm not questioning you, but I got everything, from 60 minutes to 90 minutes. I want to make sure you're going to take your time. And he laughed. And I said, what? He said, well, he goes, look, the shorter time that we have you open, the better. Right? The longer you're open, bad things start to happen. First of all, the longer you're exposed, you're exposed to the possibility of infection, which in a surgery is a very real possibility. You're also open to the air, which, oxidative damage starts to occur and scar tissue starts to happen. And with any surgery, one of the key things you want to limit is scar tissue. And a lot of that has to do with being opened up, get it done, close it back up. And if someone is in there for 20 minutes or 30 minutes versus 90 minutes, what are they doing all that time? And if it means someone's in there fucking around and aggravating the tissue more and more and more, that means more trauma. And again, more scar tissue. So you want someone who is very efficient at what they do. And that doesn't mean they're going to rush, but it means they're going to get in, do what needs to be done, and not have you open or exposed for any longer than absolutely need be, because that has a lot to do with minimizing trauma, minimizing scar tissue, and accelerating recovery. So ask about the length of surgery. You'd be surprised. Another tip is to follow the money. Now, what do I mean by that? Oftentimes, the best doctors are found in areas where there's a lot of money. Right? Because whether it's to do with universities being in that area, the funding for research being in that area, and truth be told, in large, urban, metropolis type settings, whether it's in New York City, Chicago, these large cities, that's where a lot of wealth exists. And with that wealth comes a certain clientele that demands, they want the best treatment and they're willing to pay for that treatment. And oftentimes, the best universities also happen to be in those areas. So, look, I'm in Connecticut. The doctor that I saw was in New York. But I can tell you right now, in speaking to doctors in Connecticut, it was a very, very different story than what I got from speaking to doctors in New York. And I've seen this also firsthand with my father, who was, battling cancer for many years. A lot of the doctors and what their capabilities were in Connecticut, they weren't really willing to, with some of the surgical procedures my father had to undergo, they weren't willing to touch them. And in New York, they said, it's not a thing, we do this every day. So I'm not saying it to be snobby or, you're going to Manhattan because you want to be ritzy, but you want the best care. And oftentimes, the best doctors, if you're somebody who's incredibly talented, you're not going to go work in some bumblefuck town for a low amount of pay. You're going to be in the mix with other people who are very, very good at what they do. We know that large metropolitan areas, they breed competitiveness, and a lot of times they breed just a very good product all around. So my advice is to look to people possibly in those areas. Does it guarantee that they're good? No. But this is where it also comes in. I would recommend looking at the reviews for those doctors. Right? One of the best tools we have as consumers, and in this case we're still essentially a consumer, is to look at the past experiences of people who this doctor or these doctors have treated. What do they say about them? Do they say that the surgery went well? Do they say they got an infection? And if you start to find an underlying theme with certain doctors, overwhelmingly good or overwhelmingly bad, that should weigh fairly heavily on your decision making. Being very close to New York City, I was able to look to the Hospital for Special Surgery, which is located in Manhattan, which happens to be the #1 orthopedic facility, not only in the US, but worldwide. So that right there gave me confidence, my doctor being affiliated with that hospital, being a resident there. And then also when I looked at my doctor, he listed my injury as being one of his specialties and, you know, working with many NFL and NBA players, the US ski team. I felt very confident. And there's nothing wrong too, you know, with aiming a little bit higher. You know, even if you're not a professional athlete, you're any old guy, you still want somebody really good working on you. You know what I mean? Doesn't mean you want somebody just throwing you back together. So just to give you guys a quick recap, in finding the right doctor, first thing, do your homework and find out your insurance benefits, right? Find a doctor who's in network. Next, when it comes to finding the right doctor, talk to a doctor who performs your procedure often, okay? Ask him how long the surgery is going to take and compare his answer to other doctors. Make sure that he sees other patients that are like you, right? And finally, find out what his prior patients have had to say about him. What kind of reviews they give. Is he good? Is he bad? All these things combined should be enough to help you make the best decision possible when it comes to finding the right orthopedic surgeon. I know that some of this material might be a little bit dry, but I'm hoping that it will help some of you guys out there who, in the future, you come across it, you sustain an injury, either you look to it then or you remember it from watching it now. This is just things that I've come across in the last couple of weeks that they're very, very important to me. And I think you guys will benefit from these things tremendously moving forward, should you be unfortunate enough to experience an acute injury. So I hope you found this helpful. Stay tuned for more videos as part of this series. We're going to start getting into more stuff like nutrition and my whole rehabilitative approach. So stay tuned, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll talk to you guys soon.